And so we had not really thought about putting a panel towards the end, but just seeing the range of ideas that came through, I think the view was it would be nice to capture it, and if there were any last thoughts that we would like to revisit again as we start and come up with where do we go from here, we could start off with some discussion in a more formal manner, and that is where we thought this panel might help us to go from this end. So what I'm going to request is each one of you to sort of like just give a minute or two of what you think could be key items that you see from your end that could be of relevance to what you do, and also of relevance you think that the community as such could try looking into based on the discussions we had. So perhaps I can start with you, Jerry, from the perspective of what you think from the Water Shortage Task Force perspective you had, and then I'll go in the order as we go. So again, the two aspects could be, what are the things that you think this community can provide as an input to you, and what are the broader products that we could start looking into, or the next steps we could start looking into that would be of value to you and your stakeholders.
I think we're at the point now, since we just went through this with Indiana Drought of 2010, is that we need to take a look at the water shortage plan, and some things didn't work in it, so I think we need to revisit that with the Water Shortage Task Force and the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Environmental Management, and make some revisions in there. And the audience, you can participate in it at the public meetings. They're advertised, and they're usually at the Indiana Government Center in Indianapolis, but there's also conference calls available, so you don't have to be present at the actual meeting. There will be a call-in number when we do meet. I think that's kind of at the point where we're at now, is changing a few things in the water shortage plan, some things that didn't work, and maybe adding some things that might possibly need to go in there. And we also at the point where we've lost some of the Water Shortage Task Force members. We had 10 before, and I think we're now down to about 7 or 8 now. Some people have left to do other things, some are out of the country. So we'll probably be looking to appoint some other members to fill up so the Water Shortage Task Force is at the full strength.
I guess some reflections of what I've heard here this week. I think the DryNet team's to be commended for putting together the symposium, which I was surprised, nicely surprised, the more holistic approach you guys took in designing everything from data to people and tools and decision support. So it had a really nice flavor of broad areas that were covered. So I think that's very good. As far as next steps, I see some short-term stuff in the near short-term, partnering to get some visibility to the efforts here, say through the NIDIS portal. And long-term, obviously some nice collaborative potential through various research calls to continue what you're doing at DryNet to see how much of that is transferable to other parts of the country, which I believe a lot of these tools that you're working on show a lot of potential to be transferred beyond just this Midwest region. So that'd be the two key things I would say and pass it on to Laura.
I'd say short term, what I can absolutely use from your community is the science and the data behind, the droughts and the threat of droughts, because that is what we would like to be able to communicate to the larger community. And then long term, as we talked about before, I think it's really essential in attacking that complacency at the community level. It's essential to have some sort of tool that can assess the vulnerability of an inevitable drought. So whether it's a smaller drought like the 2010 drought, where a lot of people didn't necessarily even recognize that as a drought in the larger community, or it's a very significant one. But I think we need some sort of model to provide a vulnerability assessment and a visual impact for the communities.
One of the things that I think might be helpful too in a perspective here is that if you look at some of the current situations and the weather-related, climate-related things that we're dealing with now, we weren't very well prepared for some of those. Katrina, some of the current floods, the releases from Gavin's Point Dam that are occurring right now that are impacting a lot of people. And it'll probably be similar to, a selling point is it'll be similar for the next drought too. We're not thinking that way as a larger community. And another thought too is that whatever we do here, we need to think about things that will change management practices, decisions, or behavior. That's where the real change is going to occur, and the practical benefit of impacting lives and livelihoods will occur.
We could perhaps open it up if others want to join in to have any other next steps that they would have.
I'll just make a comment here. First of all, just as a really a comment, I just want to take this opportunity to thank all the DryNet Symposium organizers for doing such a magnificent job. It was excellent to have people come from different backgrounds and giving really excellent presentations. Now, the ultimate objective is to mitigate the detrimental impacts of drought. I mean, that is ultimately what eventually we all should be here for, which means the drought mitigation and management, and that then entails basically the integration of the advances which have been presented in different disciplines and which will be happening in different disciplines, including engineering, hydrology, agriculture, climatology, geography, meteorology, economics, and so on. So the question, really the long-term goal should be as to how can all these advances be brought together to bear on the development of strategy for drought mitigation and management. And this is what really ultimately we should all aim at.
I was just going to add another thought that thanks to Chris, this is the happiest drought meeting I've ever been to. I've been doing this for 15 years. It's the happiest one. But what I really seriously wanted to say, I forgot to say, I told Dev last night this. I was very, very impressed by the posters. Going to a lot of professional meetings and such, the quality of the posters and the work that students have done. Obviously, you've got a nice collaborative effort going here. I just wanted to commend the professors and your students for a job well done on those posters last night. Yeah.
And for all the students.
Yeah. Thank you. I think the science with relation to precipitation, drought indices, now the water quality is coming. At least the drought science has reached a mature point. I think we have to also couple the probabilistic studies onto secondary effects. I mean, instead of not just stop at precipitation or water flow, take it to the next level. Crop losses, the other impacts. Can we couple the probabilistic models for those processes also? And then take the science to that.
Can you just add a slide in this talk about the biofuel aspect? So if you want to expand on that on the next
Definitely, I would love to. But before I move to the biofuel, I have a comment or a question about communicating drought and how it should be mitigated. We have too many regions in the U.S. where water availability does not commensurate with existing crop production. For example, rice being produced in the areas where there is no water. How do we communicate that information that this is not sustainable and it's something that needs to be seriously considered? I don't know. It's a question on my mind, and it's just not within the U.S. but probably worldwide, where you continue to grow things because that's how it was done traditionally, historically, generation after generation. It may not have been a problem from water availability point of view in the past, but the current water availability dictates that that the current practices be seriously reevaluated. How do we communicate that to instill a behavior change so that we can?
So you're saying that farmers are in some cases staying with older practices that may need to be changed, but with changes in their local climate. Is that?
That's.
And how do you get them over to new things that may be potentially more profitable? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I mean, the way that I know that you influence farmers is that you go to the people who they depend upon and trust with the information, and that typically would be their input suppliers, university extension people, their crop consultants, and probably most importantly, other farmers is who they trust. That's sort of their information network. I mean, it's like all of us here in this room have our colleagues that I certainly do myself. I have a group of colleagues that I consult and I can, share my deepest secrets with and tell them a stupid idea and they'll react to it, those kind of things. And so I think we need to find out who those people are and work through those channels. And the way those people work is through demonstration plots, through getting a farmer. I've done a lot of work with Beck AgCom that they do a lot of teleconference marketing, what I would say. You get a farmer that's done the practice, and you get him on a teleconference with a group of other farmers, and you have that farmer tell what he's been doing, his management practices. And that is pretty powerful. Companies use this to market pesticides and seeds and those kind of things, but that would really work to change farmer practices, I would think.
Thank you. Now back to the biofuel question. With all the emphasis that's happening on meeting 36 billion gallon biofuel production goal and putting all the emphasis on the new bioenergy crops that we need to be producing, we may be on the verge of seeing the largest land use change in agricultural landscape, perhaps after European settlement. One thing that will dictate whether, how efficiently we meet the biofeedstock production goal for 36 billion gallon biofuel production is the water availability. If you look at the data, two of the main perennial bioenergy crops which are being advocated, switchgrass and miscanthus, under the drought stress conditions, their yields go down by 70–80% of what is expected. And therefore, either a lot more land would be needed to produce the same amount of biofeedstock, or they would have to be produced under irrigated conditions. And in many other areas, such as Southeast, we don't have, we may not have water to afford irrigated biofeedstock production. So how are we going to do that?
For one piece of information, if you don't mind, NASA Glen Research Center is working on using crops in swamps to make biofuel. So that's one option. They are bent on not impacting on food production, Because, you know, we are going to reach the point of where food production is going to be very, very critical too. So we cannot compromise food production for energy production. So we are going to reach that point. So the thinking by NASA is to make use of these swampy marshland crops for biofuel development. So if it catches on, if that research were to become successful, so the model will change.
Bruce, do you want to take that through?
Yeah, and I wasn't checking my own email here. What I was looking at was for a headline that I thought I saw earlier today where the EPA has drastically lowered their estimates for future non-corn ethanol production, cellulosic. And you maybe saw that same headline. And I don't know when that actually occurred, but you know, you're absolutely right in terms of, you know, maybe the potential for in light of shifting weather patterns, climate, those kind of things, that biofuels will be different. But the timeline on that has shifted a lot further into the future.
Right, and just along those lines of biofuel, I guess, Bruce, the Senate voted down or voted against re-upping the, what, 50, 40, how much was it per gallon?
49 cents, I can't remember.
Yeah, but that, wouldn't you say that's if that carries through, isn't that a huge setback to the industry?
Yeah, I always hesitate to answer some of these things because we have energy experts in my department that would cringe at my comments, of course, but
they're not here.
Yeah.
It's being recorded.
Okay. I mean, I looked at that as more of a kind of a blow in terms of the thinking in terms of ethanol, but maybe not much of a realistic blow because there's still the mandate in terms of the percentage that blenders have to use in gasoline. You know, there's still that underlying, and so the fundamentals of the market are still basically there. And they say, of course, the Senate vote doesn't make any difference because it's not going to pass in the House, from what I've read about that anyway.
Okay.
And so that's probably dead on arrival anyway.
I guess the other comment I had, kind of going back to the other, raising crops where it's not sustainable, is that, and believe me, I'm not a huge free enterprise advocate or anything like that, but doesn't that tend to help get rid of unsustainable practices with or without climate? I mean, if for example, a municipality needs the water, they'll buy the water rights in the West, for example, or rent them or lease them if they can. Or a judge will simply rule in favor of the people getting the water than agriculture, you know, something along those lines. So that seems to happen quite often with those, some of the unsustainable practices that are going on, perhaps, in agriculture. Some ways those things sort of get sorted out. I know in Colorado, for example, it'd be really nice to have the woman who, I can't remember her name, Mark, who knows all about the Colorado sort of drought and climate plan that they have, and one of the things that they do is simply buy rights for Denver for water, and from the South Platte River basin. So anyway.
They buy land to get water.
They buy land or the right. You can buy the rights too, right.
One thing that we feel currently within our department is that in order to address the world food security needs that we feel are imminent in the future, and you can get a lot of different opinions about this as to population growth and all those kind of things, is that we need to be in a high output kind of a situation, producing more per acre. Some people would prefer that agriculture be more of a low input, low output sort of a thing, you know, thinking from an environmental standpoint and the impact that we make. But frankly, you know, we think that the best opportunity for producers is to, you know, to try to produce the most on that unit per acre. And that will help with the situation. And I don't know if that necessarily, you know, has a lot to do with this meeting, necessarily. We might be a little off the central focus here, but We, you know, in our department here, we feel that there's a lot of you know, targets being aimed at large agricultural producers, and that they're sometimes the bad people. But the minority of producers are, frankly, the people that are producing the lion's share of the food. And you know, we certainly feel that people should have choice in terms of what types of foods that they produce. But if we're going to solve the world's food problems, we feel, for the most part in our department, that we're going to have to you know, engage those people that are using the technology and implementing the technology, and not turn the clock backwards and go to practices that we used back a generation or two ago.
I totally agree with you, and you know, in my limited way in USAID, working with how we promote that idea that, you know, that you're going to have to go for high yield production. But at the same time, I think we also have to, when I look at the food insecurity and how it's evolved over the last 4 years, you know, biofuels and the huge diversion into biofuels has had a really huge, you know, it's probably created about a third of the food insecurity increase that's happened over the last 3 years, which has probably put maybe 150 million people into hunger. You know, so I mean, I agree that the technology is important, but it seems to me that the distortions of the market system have really taken a lot of food out of people's mouth as well. So, sorry, I had to get on my soapbox.
Well, I'm going to pose a question to the panel and then again to the broader one. This issue that we have discussed, how do we include uncertainty into our drought estimates? Are there thoughts that this would help with your clientele, if you wish, or your operations? Right now, as you know, we have discrete categories of drought: D1, D2, D3, D4. Floods, on the other hand, you have a 30% flood probability, and that took some time for that community to come to that point where they could start communicating that aspect.
Is there something we need to do from our end to start going towards that point of where we are having more probabilistic drought representation? One. Second, the uncertainties that we have in our estimates at a local scale, particularly when people are doing those decisions. And three, in a more practical way, how do we convey this thing, both on the maps as well as just communicating to the people? So I think to recap, I'll say that A, is it a good idea to go from our discrete to a more probabilistic mode of drought representation? And if so, what should be our approach in communicating this and mapping this up?
I think as far as how you should communicate it, it's really important to find something that will speak to, you know, the communities, because obviously the message is going to them. So if it's D1, D2, D3, D4, and that makes sense, then I think, you know, I'm just going to tie this back to flooding real quick, but one of the issues we have with flooding is explaining to a community what a 100-year flood is. Nobody knows what that means, you know, or a 10% chance flood. Nobody knows what that means. So that's something we struggle with all the time, and I think you can run into the same issues with a drought.
So most of us were fine with 100-year floods until they started happening every 5 years.
Well, and there's a misconception, is, you know, you say to somebody in Johnson County in 2008, oh, you had a 500-year flood, and they're like, well, we just had a 100 one last year, you know, it's not fair. But that's how it's misleading. So I kind of like the idea of leaving it as a D1, D2, D3, D4. I mean, it's very much like, you know, the Fujita scale for tornadoes, and it just, I think it's a universal scale. I think it makes sense to people.
I think that whole issue brings up that whole stationarity issue again. When you talk about a 1 in 100 year isn't what they thought it was, you know, 10, 15 years ago. And dealing with extremes. And if we can deal with the extremes, we can handle the gradual adaptation trend upward, be it less precip or higher temperatures or whatever. I see a greater need, at least in the forecasting arena, for more of that. Perhaps on the drought side too. The drought monitor, as you know, is not a forecast, rather a current assessment. So we hope we're 100% sure of what we're saying at that time with the convergence of evidence. But I guess from a forecasting side of it, probabilistic might help. For us, from our mission, the proactive mitigation standpoint, we should always be assuming a worst case scenario and planning for that, whether that's next year, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years from now. Makes no difference to us. Our mentality would be, you should be planning and prepared for that event. Whether you tell me that's going to happen next year with a 60% probability or 10 years from now, it doesn't probably affect our mode of operation. But if I'm a producer out there, a lot of times they'll tell us what the drought monitor, we're not trying to even tell the people that use the drought monitor what drought's doing in their backyard. They're using it to look at it. They want to know, when are you going to make the Russian drought monitor or the South American drought monitor globally, because it's such a global market now, and their commodity trading and everything, their whole decision-making process is so connected to this global market that I think that's a bigger driver right now than what's going on in their backyard.
I really like the drought monitor. I use it a lot. I look at it frequently, and but I would say, from a economic perspective, from a business planning perspective, the percentages and the predictions would be exceptionally valuable for agriculture. That's the world that I live in, and for planning purposes, the only danger I see with that, of course, is that with more information, you're going to be held to the fire more if you're whether you're right or whether you're wrong, and you know, you need to be able to accept that and to go accordingly.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I agree with Mark. I think no matter what the uncertainty is, you always have to prepare for the worst for every year.
So the only outlook now is the 3-month drought outlook from that I know of anyway. There's probably private firms that do the climatic from the climatic prediction center. It comes out on a monthly basis for the next 3 months. And being from NOAA, I can say
it lacks something. It lacks a little something. So we've heard the call for from agriculture mainly to break it down to a week, or break it down to a series of weeks out into the future. And so you could have a prediction that drought will grow or fade or whatever on almost a weekly basis. And during certain times of the year, of course, that's much more important. And I imagine that's true. Well, I don't want to make any excuses for NOAA, but that seems to be a hard thing for us to grasp with the resources that we have to work with. That's about all I can say about that.
I'll add to that. They are now doing an experimental 30-day. We've been asking for that since they came out with this outlook, because quite frankly, when they came out with this outlook, the seasonal drought outlook, which we didn't talk about this week, that was produced starting again about a decade ago, but it was based mostly on products that were 14 days or less. So really, and calling it a 90-day outlook is just a farce, quite frankly. But when you have strong ENSO events, it's okay. It's okay. More strong in the winter, of course, than summer. But you know, this last year's another classic example. We had a strong La Nina event. It's going to be warm and dry. They painted the picture up all the way across the Gulf Coast states like you would think, given the analogs. And it didn't pan out that way. NAO blocked and did its job to keep the eastern seaboard cool, including the southeast, which staved off the drought there, turned up the heat in Texas and made it worse there. So some parts of that were right, some parts are wrong. But they are making a 30-day now, I believe experimentally. As far as I know, at least that's what I heard from Ed last time I talked to him. But I think what people might not know is that the seasonal drought outlook uses a drought monitor. Anything D1 or worse is the outline of the seasonal drought outlook, and to show improvement means it's going to get one category better, or to show deterioration predicts over the next 90 days. When we come back and look at the drought monitor 90 days from now, it'll be one category worse. So if you're at D4, all they're saying is you could get to D3, and then they have this what's the one category they call some improvement likely. You could actually still stay in D4. So is that improvement? A lot of people hate that. So myself included.
The developing drought category 2 is not
Yes, that's right. That's right.
I'm just going to ask Jerry to comment on the uncertainty part.
In terms of Indiana, to make things clearer to the public, I think something that might be helpful is to take a look at droughts that have occurred in Indiana's past. I know Mark's drought monitor is going to look at things historically, but the general public, I don't know. They would need some text and some type of description to go along with it for possible economic aspects if something like that occurred now, like the 30s drought or some of the other droughts that have occurred in the past in Indiana.
So saying simplified description of a drought monitor from a local perspective.
Yeah, history of drought. We don't really have a very good description of that in plain language or even in scientific language. The USGS has a few blurbs about drought in the past in Indiana, but it's just a few paragraphs. We had a student at Purdue that did it as part of his senior thesis, and that was a good start, but I think it needs to be elaborated on to really catch public's attention. It's something we could post on our website where it'd be available for viewing, or on the DryNet site too, but on the public website just for the general public on our webpage.
Yeah, I think it definitely needs to be a lot more visible, and I really think that, you know, expanding this mitigation to the public, as you're saying, it has to come from the top down. It's got to come from the DNR and the DHS, and maybe DHS can use the 10 districts in Indiana, and they can communicate this risk at a regional level where you're only dealing with 4 or 5 counties, and they've all got, you know, similar risks to drought. But yeah, it's just got to be a lot more visible, I think.
I think one of the problems with the droughts is, unlike floods, where I think, you know, I would tend to disagree. Most people do understand what a 100-year flood is, and partly because in urban areas you cannot build houses in floodplains which are below 100-year flood level. So there I think most people do have a pretty good understanding. But the difficulty with the drought is because it has too many attributes that have to be associated with it. You know, besides severity, then it lasts for a long time, it covers over a long areal extent, and then more than that, there are just too many types of droughts. And so the public has to be communicated with what exactly we are talking about. Besides rainfall-related meteorological drought, you have hydrological drought, you have a soil moisture-related drought. There are all kinds of droughts associated. And then, of course, you know, the anthropogenic influences come into play. Even if there is plenty of water available far distant away, if the public does not have access to it, as far as they are concerned, they are suffering from a severe drought. So there are many man-made factors that come into play. But having said all this, I think it is important to communicate in simple language to the public as to what we are talking about as regards drought, and categorizing it into these D categories, D1, D2, D3. I think it's a simple way of doing it, but at the same time, it will be good to associate that with some level of uncertainty, so that the people understand that there is that uncertainty element associated with it. Just like in the case of hurricanes, you know, hurricanes, they don't, you know, they do not associate hurricanes with a probability distribution. They simply say hurricane, they use Hadley scales, hurricane of category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which are directly translating to wind velocity ranges. So when public is communicated as to a hurricane occurring in category, let's say 5, public immediately understand the wind velocity will be more than 150 miles per hour. And if it is 4 category, then they know what the wind velocity will be. Essentially, they are saying this is what the ferocity or the force of the hurricane winds will be. And likewise, the most important parameter in case of droughts is really the severity. But at the same time, it also has to be associated with the areal extent and the likely duration, which complicate really communicating what the drought is. And so I think some of those things have to be communicated in very simple terms. So we don't have to do away with this decategorization. I think it's a simple way of communicating. The general public can easily understand.
That we create some simple stories about impacts.
Right. Yeah.
And then make that available on websites.
Right. But part of the part of the complicating factor is that we do not have in many areas as spatial coverage of empirical observation networks as we would really like, and that has to be there. And this again is a complicating factor. But regardless of what complexities with regard to droughts are, the information about droughts has to be communicated to the public in very simple, easy to understand language. And associated with that, perhaps this uncertainty assessment certainly might be helpful.
I'm going to open this for the students particularly and encourage you to ask these questions, because other than your homework assignments, if there's any question you have, I mean, here are some experts. If you have any doubts in your mind or questions that you have had that have not been addressed over the last 2 days, this would be a great opportunity to voice it and have those answered. It could be as simple as, how was my poster, of course. Others, yes, as a question. While you guys are thinking about a question.
Okay, while the students are thinking, I thought I would sort of pose another question. You know, after hearing to many of these talks and the discussion, this is, I think, specifically for Lauren and Mark's both. I think Mark pointed out today morning during Lauren's presentation that when we try to compute impacts on the US drought monitor, if you go, you can download a document which lists hydrologic factors, environmental factors, economic factors, and so on, that one should use in trying to assess impact of a drought. So a D3 drought in Indiana versus a D3 drought, let's say in Florida, will not have the same impact, even though the drought categorization is the same. What is on the ground makes a big difference too. And I was wondering, Mark, for instance, would it not be useful to have a list of experts of some sort, not only look at all those categories, but also rank them, let's say on a scale of 1 to 5, what impact they have for, let's say, some of the major land uses, like urban areas. A D0 category has this kind of an impact on a scale of 1 to 5 for that particular factor. For agricultural areas, that particular factor, a D3 drought, for instance, has this kind of an impact. If we have that kind of a template developed, then we are essentially on a very good platform to start talking about impacts. Then if we can come back and talk to economists and talk about costs and so on, then we can essentially ask Lauren's question about how to put in hazards so that dollar values can be attached to it, and then you can make your statements to FEMA or other federal funding agencies. So I see basically it's possible to have an algorithm that would allow us to do that and make that message be available. But I think it would require some community involvement and basically development of this methodology. So Mark and Lauren.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, we've thought of something very similar. I think the vehicle to do so right now is NIDIS. The workshop we did in Chicago a couple weeks ago for the Engaging Preparedness Community was to develop a drought planning preparedness community. Inviting in, at this point it was probably more train the trainers, but the next step, engaging American Planning Association, ICLEI, and others. We have a list, we maintain a list of state drought contacts too, but would be, I think if we could work directly with you to develop those questions that would make for a great two things. One thing EPC is doing now is doing the same method that you spoke about earlier, using GoToMeeting and teleconference to do a series of short webinars based on survey results of surveys like you just said. Survey the expert communities, identify those people and get the survey, then we get the results back, and then we do a short webinar, invite all these people in, and we have a discussion about those things. So that would be a great way to flesh out and help us. I think we want to do at this last U.S. Drought Monitor Forum in Virginia and D.C. this last March, one of the things that we want to do is revise the table. And knowing how impacts differ from state to state would be the next evolution, because right now it's one table, but we know it's not one size fits all for every state. But could you have separate states? The authors could quickly look at that. Here's what's important in Indiana versus Texas or Florida. So it's a great, and the time of year is seasonality is a big thing too. But that, I think that's a great thing to pursue, and I think NIDIS would be willing to fund that survey activity, for example, with your help.
I think as far as applying it to a model, once the damage curves are set, once that's determined, then as far as, you know, one community being rural and one being urban, as long as you're using local data, you know, local demographic data and economic data, I think that, you know, the differences in those communities would automatically be assessed. But I don't think you can do it without local data.
I completely agree with you. So what I had in mind sort of was when we have this template developed, then we can add on information on what's on the ground. You know, how many acres of farmland, how many schools, how many hospitals, what industries need how much water, what population is being affected. That would bring all the local stuff in. So when we are trying to convey the impact in whatever units we want, we would of course want to engage all this local information. And so Mark, from what I'm hearing, perhaps this is something that, you know, perhaps DryNet can initiate for one of your future US Drought Monitor meetings, because that I think is a very good forum where, you know, the right people get together and we can try and design some sort of a survey which will essentially help not just us, but others also in trying to do this computation then.
Yes. But the survey probably should be vetted at a local scale,
yes.
Perhaps with the Indian or even some regional scale, and then taken to the drought monitor for a more broader.
I would say prior to the next forum though, because the next forum is in Mexico next year, because it alternates between the North American and U.S. So we won't be back in the U.S. again until 2013. So it is 2011. 2012 will be in Mexico, and then 2013, in the spring of 2013, will be back in the States. But I think with NIDIS, the EPC group has already done 2 webinars.
Okay.
I think that could be spun up much sooner than, say, a year and a half from now.
So I think this is something that we within DryNet also should perhaps think about and see how we'll do it.
Yeah, we would welcome that.
I was going to pose a question to the data people here, the 2 of them, on what do they see from what you have heard about DryNet and the presentation and discussion. Where do you see that we should be taking this next, both as a portal as well as a discussion to be continued?
Well, you know, I don't know that I feel qualified to answer. I mean, it depends on, the typical thing you usually do is requirements analysis and implementation. And I think it seems to me that DryNet has identified some requirements over the course, at least of the interop grant, and met them. So I guess the next question would be, what's the next appetite to do, and yet stay focused on, you know, the drought community. So I'm sorry, I don't have a good idea.
Do you see any similar parallel effort with a different discipline that could be merged in from what you have seen with the data one, for instance?
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity for collaborations there, and probably should be pursued. Dilution is something you should watch out for, right? I mean, make sure that it's still meeting the core requirement.
Dave, isn't the most pertinent question at this point, what can we do that's going to attract grant dollars? Or maybe you guys are flush with money, I don't know.
I think we know you.
Yeah, I'm all about the money, yeah.
Well, indeed, I think the science and the needs are going to go towards the next mode of where we go in terms of funding. And as Mark has also said, those are some of the things we'll be tapping into with USDA or UNICEF and others and so forth. But if you do know of any foundations or other avenues or some rich farming business that would be interested, do let us know.
Okay.
Jan?
Yeah, hi, I'm a graduate student of Dr. Niyogi, And he said, I will graduate soon. So, so I'm just thinking that some idea come across my mind that about my future, that I should be a research scientist doing about drought index, or I don't know, I just want to ask question to your drought research. Something came across my mind that, is that possible that I want to open the company that do cloud seeding? I don't know that. Do they do the cloud seeding in America? Because in my country, we did it a lot. And when you had drought, you just call me, and then I just make the rain. And do you think I'm gonna get a lot of money from that?
Then you can pay for Dr. Niyogi here. Yeah, have you ever noticed how after the 4th of July it rains a lot? Actually, there are several efforts for cloud seeding in America, mostly in the western arid states. Some states dedicate quite a large budget. You know, Oklahoma, for example, is about $1 million a year to cloud seed. Others, New Mexico. But there's also a lot of potential downstream litigation potential, downstream as in atmospheric downstream, not down the river. So I would say get into sort of you go into law for your next degree. It pays better, I'll tell you that.
I'm going to excuse myself at this point. My daughter and my wife are touring the dormitory right now, so thanks very much.
I have a question pertaining to how drought can set up other disasters, and in particular flooding. And earlier, Mr. Matt Barlow mentioned when he was doing the research in Asia that if you have the antecedent condition of the drought, then floods are more likely. Is there research, or is there even, say, the way that we have an index for drought that can forecast the susceptibility of an area which is under drought conditions to flooding?
Great question. There isn't an index to do that, in my opinion, and I agree with Matt on that. In a changing climate, as I mentioned yesterday, one of the, and it's not an indice, I'll call it an indicator, okay? A parameter to sort of track that we're looking at is generated by Arrow's data center, is the days between rain events. And the longer that time goes, the more susceptible we are to heavy rain-off events. Your soils become crusted, and so it's a proxy for what you're asking. Is it a hard index that people have researched and have said, yeah, with a 80% confidence that your effective rainfall rate is going to be reduced by 50% after 32 days in Indiana? No, I don't know that, but I think there'd be some potential to research that, and those again, that timing of time between events and extreme events with heavy rainfall might mean more rainfall, but not necessarily more effective rainfall, but more runoff, flash floods, and things of that nature on the heels of droughts. A lot of droughts you do see like in Nebraska, the worst drought for loss of life occurred during the Dust Bowl because it hit the ground and just ran off, and people were just caught off guard. So.
An index or an indicator would have to do the amount of runoff.
Okay, yeah, so. Yeah, you know, there's obviously some assimilation models and other efforts out there that I'm not as familiar with that may be able to do what you asked. I don't know if, Matt, if you have anything you want to add to that. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think you hit on the main point. I think the days between is the most straightforward thing to do. I mean, you could certainly do a lot of other things as well, but I'm not familiar with any detailed research on that, so that I think it's pretty wide open, actually.
It's a great idea if you're not into a PhD yet. Are you a PhD student, or?
I'm starting in the fall.
Yeah, so maybe that's
There's your topic.
It's a satellite-derived product. It's not trim-based because it's North American. I'm forgetting which sensor they're using, but that data we link to directly on our website at the Drought Mitigation Center. I can get you in touch with those people if you're interested. Just email. We'll get you in touch with them.
So what was the topic again?
Indicator for potential flooding during droughts. When do you see an increase? Maybe what's that triggering threshold? I think it's a fascinating
What
research
brought it
topic.
to mind? What brought it to mind is that last year on my island in the Caribbean, St. Lucia, we had the worst drought in probably 100 years. I think it was a 100-year drought. In the dry season is around what we call the spring here. And
yes.
In October, late October, we had Hurricane Thomas, which was 1 in 200-year flood. So what I was thinking, because I grew up in the country and I know the clay soils, the deep clay soils in the mountains, when during the dry season you have cracks, and when the dry season is longer, you have the cracks widen more. And so the slopes remain sort of vulnerable to a heavy rain, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, we had a lot of landslides and flows.
Is any of that related to? Is any of that related to deforestation?
To an extent.
Like in Haiti, you know, where we have these big issues in Haiti compared to, say, Dominican Republic, that changed the policy on some of the foresting issues that don't stop it necessarily, but that's an interesting observation.
To an extent, yeah. To an extent, the farming on the slopes, because you could tell where some landslides happen on the slopes and so forth.
Well, I think that topic we could certainly follow up more.
Yeah.
Anybody else wants a research topic?
The first one's free, and then after that.
There's one more question back there.
Then it's a beer after. Yeah. Cheap.
Well, I don't necessarily want a research topic, but I am curious as to where you all think voids exist currently in the field of drought studies that you kind of like the future generation of drought scientists to start looking into.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What was it?
The very first part you said.
Where do you all think there are voids in the field of drought studies that you'd like the future drought scientists of tomorrow to start looking into?
Well, I'll go first because I'm the one who's not a scientist, so I can't answer that with very much authority, but the voids that I see are simply taking the detailed research and science that, you know, some of the people here are doing and communicating that to a larger population.
I would say maybe the prediction. I think we've gotten a lot better about it. With Indiana, with La Nina conditions, we kind of have a feeling for what we can expect with La Nina. So I'd say we can continue on that and try to come up with a better idea of weather patterns and what can be expected for certain conditions.
I would say, he stole my first one. That's good, though. Prediction is important. I think it requires a hybrid. Drought is such a cross-sectoral that understanding the economics, you know, it took a whole panel to kind of cover the different areas that drought impacts, but the more diverse, actually, you can be, makes you more valuable to some degree. And I'd say impacts, the study of impacts, which gets again into a little bit of the economic side of it. And in the West, I wasn't kidding when I said law. You know, I mean, water law and environment is huge. Ecosystem services, things of that nature. Dr. Singh might have some good ideas on that too, voids.
You said it
right. Good afternoon, Rashad Riley from Central State University. As an undergrad student, guys, want to appreciate you guys for presenting all this information. My only question though is do you guys see any correlation, this is for anyone, correlation between droughts and any other natural disasters? For instance, in Indiana, there was a disaster, droughts from 30 to 35. Is there any correlation between maybe the Great Depression during that time frame as well for the drought or any other natural disasters?
I think the obvious one was forest fire.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Forest fire.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good, I mean, it exacerbates. There's a normal fire. You know, the first drought monitor map we did when we developed it actually had fire as an impact type label. And because of the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise doing similar work, it got too confusing for people though, because there is a fire season every year. And what drought does is exacerbate it. But what's more important to me is when were the wet periods prior to the drought, because that develops a fuel load. So if you have consecutive dry years, you had a big fire and we're 5 years later into the same drought in the West, doesn't mean an increased fire sort of coverage or anything of that nature. The reason Arizona's burning bad is because they had some really great winters prior. And so now the normal droughts, fire season comes along, starts a fire up, and there's a lot of fuel to burn. So, you know, but there's still that connection, no doubt about it, that's there. But off the top of my head, I can't think of others outside of this flash flood question that was kind of asked about that.
Well, from a cultural standpoint, the lowering of lake levels along with the long-term drought in northern Indiana, we get calls all the time from the people that live on the glacial lakes complaining about their lake levels too low. But if you go back to 1964, when Lake Michigan was historically at its lowest from the records from 1918 to the present, and it's about 13 or 14 inches above that level right now. So if we had a long drought, something similar to 64, then that would interfere with their lives considerably up in northern Indiana.
Is there any other last questions before we?
I probably should have asked the agronomist before he left, but he was talking about different soil types and the drainage that happens between the different soil types, sandy and clay. And I was wondering if anybody could touch on how the drought monitor or any of these monitors look at soil types and how is the mapping going. I know some people are working on it now, but what's currently in place as far as mapping of soils and how that relates to the drought monitor?
Well, as far as it relates to the drought monitor, it's more indirect. I mean, through the indices. Does the indicator take into account the soil profile at all? Most of them don't. The land data simulation, there are some simple models that were talked about a lot more yesterday. Some do a better job than others, and we've watched those over the last couple of years, and you kind of get a feel for which ones you trust, which ones don't do as good a job. As far as what's out there, prior to my work at the Drought Mitigation Center, I actually worked for when it was still called Soil Conservation Service. And so at that time, they were really digitizing all the county level SERGO data. StatsGo is out there available for anyone. SERGO, you can go into USDA.gov and get soil survey county level data right now, digitized, for most, probably 95% of the US right now. So that data's out there, and that's all done by, that's not modeled, that's actually done by surveys by soil scientists. So each state has a soil scientist if you have more interest in that. They're now called the Natural Resources Conservation Service, but NRCS is the agency for that kind of data if you're looking for that.
And with that, I will thank the panel for a very insightful thing. And if you have any other further questions, please do follow up with them or others that are here. So with that, I'll thank you again.